Given the recent exposure in the media of the large-scale healthcare fraud that has been unearthed, it's a great opportunity to segue into medical record falsification and the impact that has had in my case, how the little guy is affected by healthcare fraud. So many crimes and false investigations were perpetuated as a result of medical record falsification in my case, and it allowed for the justification of theft against me and persecution and a whole mess of criminal activity. We often think of white collar crime as the lesser of crimes. Obviously street crime is obvious danger, whereas white collar crime tends to be more undetected, and there's a level of skepticism because we assume that those who sit on the bench or operate under the law or wear a badge, those that are in the medical profession, we as the public assume that we can trust them and we place trust in them. And those in those authority positions take oaths of ethical behavior. So we just assume that they're going to honor those. So the impact when there is a breach of trust on the public is much more large scale. Entire communities, organizations, the public at large can really have negative impact. Therefore, the consequence for those in these roles, these trusted roles, should be equally large, in my opinion. In my situation, I was persecuted and attacked by a large and powerful religious organization based upon lies. No one ever came to me and asked me my side of the story. I don't think the truth was ever desired in my situation. It was much more enjoyable and justifiable based upon some interesting religious views, I guess, to jump on a hate train and persecute and gang stalk and attack and stalk and terrorize me for whatever religious justification they were able to find. But at the time, I was receiving chiropractic care from somebody of this faith group. And my visits started to get really weird. I was getting a really weird feeling. But what put the nail in the coffin was one morning I was in the waiting room and the receptionist got a phone call and stepped into the hallway. And I could hear her whispering, but I could still hear her call. And she was explaining that the doctor had been receiving these large monthly payments to alter my medical records and furnish them to some unknown party of which I had no knowledge of which I had provided no consent for my protected record to be released. And so I terminated care, obviously, and requested a copy of my medical record. And what I found was very alarming. In this extended time of care that I had been seeing this chiropractor, he had notated on multiple visits that I was unable to provide basic life tasks. I couldn't function more than 2 hours a day. Meanwhile, in real life, I lift weights, I do Pilates, I kayak, I bike, I hike, I garden, I paddleboard, I do hot yoga, I do all these active things. So it became very scary. Why is this medical provider essentially trying to depict me as if I have a disability in this record? So I reported it to the FBI and had follow-up phone conversation with an agent. Unfortunately, that conversation was not fruitful, even though my concerns were very significant. That did not result in what I would have hoped for. But at the same time, there was also a situation where I had sought medical care at a nurse practitioner office, and it was a disaster. It was totally unprofessional, and I decided I didn't want to go there, and I left a negative review about my experience, and this office receives a lot of negative reviews, so I'm not alone. I should have checked those reviews before I ever went there because a lot of the complaints are quite similar. But what was really scary is the owner of this practice. If you leave a negative review for her, she will retaliate. And in my case, I've never met her. She's never provided me care. But this woman has altered my medical records and scribbled all these crazy things on my medical records. So now I have a compromised medical record, which makes it very difficult for me to receive future health care, because any future provider is going to see these crazy notes and have a false portrayal of my health history and who I am. And that's going to impact how I'm treated and the kind of care I'm going to receive. So, unethical medical record falsification has really significant impact on the future health care of victims. When all of this is being exposed, it really gave me hope. I'm really thankful that there are good and ethical detectives following through on these crimes, because they're serious and the impact is very serious. And I just hope in my case there can be a similar unearthing. The bystander effect is the theory that we as humans, psychologically, if we see someone, say we're walking along the street and we see someone that has a heart attack that needs help, the bystander theory, or the bystander effect, is that we assume, oh, there's other people here, I'm not going to get involved, I'm sure someone else will help them. In my case, this is what happened. No one stood up for what was right. Many, many people saw crimes being committed against me, had knowledge of it, knew that I was being victimized, and did nothing, did not do the right thing. And these large-scale crimes would not be possible if people who witnessed them had the courage to say something and to intervene. As public, that's our responsibility. And it can be scary, but we have a duty when we see people being mistreated, when we see unethical practices occurring, when we see crimes being committed, we have a responsibility to intervene and to say something. When you have a large community or a large and powerful religious organization normalizing to sit back and say nothing and allow people to be victims and to be discriminated against and experience hate crimes, it's just perpetuating the problem. And who will be the next victim? That's just going to become an increasing problem in that community or that organization. It reminds me of the story of the Good Samaritan in the book of Luke in the Bible. This man is walking along the road and he's attacked and stripped and robbed and beaten and left for dead. And people of his own community, religious leader, pass him by, see he needs help, and just walk away and leave him for dead and do not render aid. And it wasn't until a Good Samaritan, who was somebody who would be considered to be his antagonist, did the right thing and helped him and intervened. And we can apply this to the world we live in today. We're commanded to love our neighbor, to be kind and to be helpful to all people, even those that we would consider the antagonist in our story. And I would just encourage us to be a people that operates like the Good Samaritan, that helps all people, that doesn't discriminate and pick and choose who they're going to do right by. But when we see the underdog, or when we see victims experiencing mistreatment, that we be a people that has the courage to put an end to these large-scale crimes, that we be a voice for what is right.